The entire episode took place on an iPad. We shot the entire episode on Apple products, mostly iPhone 6s.
I'm kind of glad that didn't work.
Wait, I think I remember telling her to use something people wouldn't know about her, like her favorite literary character.
I'm in!
What? What was it?
Snoopy.
Wow. That could be your new nickname.
Okay.
We shot it all on iPhone 6. It's already heavily compressed. So our biggest concern was adding more compression. So it was native versus compression. We can bring it into the Avid, and that's not a big deal because you can go out with an AAF. But in After Effects, we tried to work native, and what we ran into was H.264 shot on an iPhone, not super compatible with After Effects. We came to this conclusion after we would send an AAF over, and there would be some drag in the footage. But it wasn't like an audio drag where after 2 seconds you're out of sync by, or 3 frames, after 4 seconds you're out of sync by 6 frames. It was really inconsistent. So the AAFs weren't matching up. At that point, this goes against everything that we've all been taught. We encoded it to Avid DNX, I think 192 or 196, and we output that from the Avid to After Effects. Every time that you see a piece of footage, when there's a multi-clip in there, we were pulling 3 pieces of footage in the Avid. So when you're working with Claire's talking to someone, now you're at 6 pieces of footage. And when you have all of the families going at once, you're working with 18 pieces of footage streaming live. So the lag got to be pretty significant. While I was figuring out all of this, our VFX producer, John Brown, who is a saint and just a wonderful man, had to recreate every aspect of OS X, every application, logo, et cetera. Because we would do these extreme push-ins, and the graphics in there can't handle that type of resolution. What was really frustrating was about a week into production, they switched over to Yosemite. And so every day, Apple would change everything in the OS. And this went on for weeks until we finally gave up, and we're just like, this is going to be the 10.9.0.1 episode. To tell our story effectively, we needed to create a conference call feature on Facetime, which does not exist. So we were a little nervous about that. Since it didn't exist, we had to kind of figure out how to do this. The problem was that you want to keep Claire present regardless of who she's talking to, because we're seeing this story through Claire's eyes, so she always needs to be there. For me, that was a big headache because then it makes it much more difficult to cut with Claire. And then the other thing that we found was that we needed separate FaceTime boxes for each character, so that if we want to do certain things with the positioning or maybe with the camera moves to make it feel more like Modern Family, it would free us up. The first pass was a full screen rough cut. What I would do is I would lay out all the information in the timeline, or all the performances the way I liked them. I'd try to paste them as close as I could get. I'd throw the sound effects in where I wanted to eventually put graphics. And I would watch it the way that Claire would watch it if she were looking at her laptop. Once I'd start laying in the graphics, I would lay in a combination of any graphics that John had finished that Apple hadn't changed, and temporary ones that were screenshots that I had taken to just kind of start piecing everything out. We shot the whole episode live. It's the first time we've ever done that. We had a green screen set up for Claire, and all 3 other houses were actually lit and ready to go. So we tried to shoot everything live to tape. That was ideal. However, it wasn't always practical to stay in the same takes. Sometimes Claire was great in take 2 and Mitch and Cam were great in take 9. Here is a timeline to kind of give an example. So the top 2 boxes are Claire. So Claire's always the same. And you can see that she's in take 7, and then she's in take 3. And we're in take 7 with Jay through most of that. But then Mitch and Cam are in 6, and then she goes over to 3. So while all this is happening, the challenge that we had was to make it feel like none of this was happening. Hiding the edits. There are probably more edits in one act of this than the entire series of Modern Family combined. So how did we do it? The first thing was the camera move, as long as it meets the criteria from before. That was always a really easy way to jump takes or hide an edit. Another thing that we found later in the process was you could do these little things that we called bump zooms, where maybe it was a 10 or a 15% move, and it was just enough to disorient the viewer so that you don't catch a small jump in the footage, as long as everybody's body positions and heads were in the same place. The next one was a video glitch. It was really important to Steve, though, that everything in this episode was as accurate as it could be. So that immediately ruled out Claire because she has a live stream coming in from her camera. Everybody else, you could do a little bit of that video lag, which also served the purpose of making it feel more authentic. and that would help hide an edit or a cut, or maybe if I just want to pace up the footage a little bit. Our After Effects workflow, our offline changes were way quicker than our online changes. Something that took me an hour took them a day. And so usually we would try to do as many changes in the Avid, as many things in the Avid as we could before we ever went out to John and Olney, just because we didn't have enough time. We would use Avid AAFs to export the sequence. Even once we got the time code problems working right, AAF and After Effects don't always play the best together. And so we could get it close, but it always required some eye matching. After the initial assembly, everything was an eye match. My assistant, I can't thank him enough. He kept the audio in sync the whole time. We would try to use Avid bin markers to communicate with each other. It was a little quicker than an EDL, a little easier to read because it had the visual references. So we'd print out a bin and we'd leave a marker in there, added 5 frames here, took out 5 frames here, so that the After Effects artist would know, and they would do something similar for us when they would need to adjust the timing for their purposes. With Steve, his daughters are away at school, and so they were FaceTiming a lot. And so he would FaceTime with his daughters, and he would see behind her like stuff happening at the school that like probably shouldn't be on camera. So for him it was like, this is really interesting because I'm talking to you, but like I can see what's going on back there. And so he really wanted to do this story, and then I think one of his kids told him, you should check out this short film, Noah. And so he watched that and he's like, that's it, that's what we want to do. And so, for the record, we talked to the kids from Noah. They're under a deal with somebody else and we couldn't work with them. So it wasn't one of those things where like, we see these kids from Canada and we take their idea. Like we really wanted to work with those guys. It wasn't working out because they'd already signed a production deal with someone else. And then they kind of wrote the script around this concept that like the way we communicate now has changed so fundamentally that like, because we're communicating with texts and iPhones and all of these other things, you don't just walk to the bedroom to see if somebody's in there sleeping. I don't know if I ruined the end of the episode. If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry. But that was kind of the idea, that we become so dependent on these devices and they're so useful that they can also lead us down another path very quickly. And that was, I think, where the story kind of came from for Steve and Megan. If nothing else, I will turn the stage over.